Theosophy obviously draws from two roots, Theosophia, Sophia being wisdom, and Theo being godlike. So the wisdom like that of the gods. And so, of course, that ends up asking what is meant by the gods and also what's meant by wisdom. But we get a sense of what that means. The Theosophical Society came into being in 1875. Actually, it started off in New York. Very often it's associated with Eastern sorts of wisdom, but it had its beginnings in New York and then sort of migrated its headquarters to India. It's a worldwide society today, 70 different countries of the world, but it's something that had its beginnings for some very particular reasons. It's said to have been started by their inner founders and then their outer founders. The two most prominent people in the founding of the society were Helena Blavatsky and a fellow named Henry Olcott. Those are the outer founders. But it's also said that on the inner level, that there are those people who are far advanced from us in terms of their wisdom and their understanding, that really felt that at this particular point in human history, there was a great need. That the current and the direction we found ourselves going in was becoming more and more focused on a materialistic view of life. We found that greatly emphasized in contemporary science view, which has limited its explanations of the cosmos to strictly the physical, the material realm. Only that which can be seen, touched, or measured by instruments is what is real. And we've sort of bought into that. So there's been this diminishing of the cosmos to the point where at every other time in human history, there was never a time when the cosmos was seen as anything less than sacred. There has always been an awareness of a sacred component. Now, if someone wants to fit in, it's very difficult to go in that direction in the business community, in the science community, that there is a sacred component. So there's been this materialization which has reduced things. Similarly, there was the awareness of a current that we also see rising that could be described as superstition, which is to say improper beliefs that largely flow out of many of these religious traditions that also have the effect of limiting not only our understanding, but the way we relate to one another. We see each other through the lenses of our particular religion, which necessarily has had this quality of creating enemies and good guys. This very black and white sort of way of viewing the world. So when the Theosophical Society was started, that was viewed as a major trend that was becoming stronger. And so the need was seen for some sort of leavening, something that could provide the synthesis that really links together the deep wisdom that is in religion, all of the world's religions, that there's a unifying thread, and that same thread throws through the other ways that we try to approach truth, which is to say through science, through religion, through philosophy. Also, you could say it flows through the arts or any other way that we try to understand the world. There's a unifying principle that can be found in all of those. That's the basis of the Theosophical Society, the Theosophical movement that began at that time. In many ways, Theosophy has been described, never completely. One of the founders described it as the accumulated wisdom of the ages, tested and verified by generations of seers.
One of the things that's so exciting about this time in human history is that we are going through a great transition from one astrological age to another. And that is actually the underpinning for the catalyst that is the source for the reemergence of the esoteric philosophy again. And it all began in the latter half of the 19th century through the work of a woman whose name is Helena Blavatsky, who was a Russian mystic. And she had traveled to India and was in search of answers to life. And she met key masters in India who began to commit to giving her and giving some insight into the esoteric philosophy, and it led her to begin to be the voice, or through her, a voice to reintroduce the esoteric philosophy into the world again, because it had been relatively dormant for a while. And that's what led to what we call today Theosophy. And Theosophy was the beginnings of a 3-step process to reintroduce the esoteric philosophy as an inaugurating effort on behalf of the emerging age.
When the Theosophical Society was founded, it was at the end of the 19th century, so the late 1800s. And obviously there were problems. First of all, this idea, the first object of the Theosophical Society was to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity. So this idea of unity among these people, which we lose sense of the context because we're living in the 21st century. But the context at that time was a world that was largely colonialized. So you had a world where a European community had colonized various parts of the world, India, Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the necessary belief structure that comes with a colonial point of view is a sense of inherent superiority of one culture beyond another. It was just the basic belief, and it justified the process. But here you have an organization and a point of view that says there is, in fact, a universal brother, that there is an equality that relates to the fact of unity. So this was a revolutionary view. It's one that now has become ingrained in the way that we function in the world, that all human beings are deemed as equal, and so that's the process we take. But there were difficulties with that. There were also difficulties with the idea that the scientific view that really dealt with matter as the sole component of this universe. To say that that's something that's untrue in the face of all these very provable sort of scientific experimentation was a difficult position to take. The position that there is this thing called consciousness that has a range that exceeds the material world was a hard one to sell. Now, at that time even, it was said that a couple of things were said. One was that H.P. Blavatsky, who was the main one who was giving these sorts of teachings and understandings, she said, and she understood quite profoundly, that the things that she was saying would not be fully understood during her lifetime. That it wouldn't be until the 20th century that these things could even be reasonably discussed, which the progression of things has proved her right. So what we find now is, at that time there wasn't such a thing as quantum physics. At that time there wasn't such a thing as Albert Einstein, who was not initially involved even in quantum physics. He even had difficulty embracing quantum mechanics. But now we have this sort of view and this language evolving through science that really embraces these sorts of non-material ways of viewing the universe. So the opportunities now for a deeper sort of understanding, all of these things now seem to be kind of coalescing.
The fundamental foundations of Theosophy was to advocate or let the world know that there is a universal brotherhood, and that there is actually a hierarchy of masters, and that evolution, that human evolution is not random, but there's a guiding brotherhood that's trying to have an influence in shaping human thought in support of the next step for humanity, and that that principle is the root from which that is trying to embed itself into the world today. Theosophy has so much to do with this idea that there is truth in all social systems, but clearly it is a synthesis of many disciplines, which helps us to see that esotericism is found in many disciplines and not just in philosophy.
Probably the seminal work that was written by H.P. Blavatsky is The Secret Doctrine, and it has two particular volumes, two approaches. The first one being cosmogenesis, or the birth and the development of the cosmos, and the second one being anthropogenesis, so the birth and the development of humanity, or the human project, you could call it. A large part of what comes across in all of these is a description of the non-physical world as one thing, that this is in fact a multi-dimensional universe. The key point being that it requires some perception of the united nature of all things. So unity, oneness, is one of the key ideas. And out of that oneness, there's this process of unfoldment that involves intelligence at every level, but intelligence being something we have to conceive of much more broadly. So, in effect, there is, much like we describe an architect, where there is the building of a structure, it takes place at many different levels. So there is this blueprint that exists that then is executed through a variety of means right down to the most menial of all workers. So this process is somewhat described. So it talks in terms of the forces and the intelligent agencies that have cooperated in the bringing about of the universe. Similarly, in the bringing about of the human being.
So the work of Helena Blavatsky, as she introduced Theosophy, began to build a lot of steam in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and you could call that the beginnings or the first dispensation. And then there began a transition, and a second dispensation came forward, and it was largely through the work of Alice A. Bailey. And she was an amanuensis, as was Blavatsky. An amanuensis is somebody who takes dictation from a great master, and Alice Bailey spent, I think it's about 29 or 30 years, taking dictation from a great master whose name we call Jawal Kul, and that this master laid out a voluminous amount of material rich in esotericism and an enhancement from the work of the past and a synthesis of the best of the past to bring it forward. And that body of work is now increasingly becoming understood and integrated into cultures around the world. But that's not the end point. It's still got more to go. There's another parallel group of teachings called the Agni Yoga work that was introduced by another Russian woman whose name is Helena Roerich. Agni means fire, and it is the yoga of fire, and it's thought to be the next step in the movement of evolution in the yoga system, the yoga of fire. And it has a lot of will to it. And will is an increasingly important thing and energy as we move forward in this philosophy, as is love and as is intelligence. And we are also given to understand that a major dispensation will likely occur sometime in the first half of this century as we move forward into the next astrological age. So we are living in a remarkably exciting and interesting time because it's not only a transition in an astrological sense, but it's a reintroduction into the mysteries in a way that we haven't seen for centuries. It's a remarkable time.